funders, program experts on the ground. Thanks, Jen. We're going to record this to share it out with folks. So big goal today is to bring folks from varying perspectives together to have the conversation about apprenticeship initiatives across industries. So today, y'all are going to hear from quite a few folks from nationally. Like I said, our partners from Apprenticeships for America. We're going to hear from our state leaders here in Maryland. Brad Fallon, the Deputy Legislative Officer in Governor Moore's office, will be here. As you can tell, Jim Rosapep, State Senator, is here. We'll also be hearing from Len Lucci, who's our Senior Advisor and Policy Expert for Maryland Workforce Alliance. And then, of course, industry partners are key to this conversation. So Tasha Cornish from Cybersecurity Association will also be sharing her perspective and how this proposed legislation is going to be impacting the work they do there. So excited to be with you all. Thanks again for joining, folks jumping in today. I know it's lunchtime. Understand if you have to be off camera to enjoy your lunch, but we also welcome you on camera to engage in the conversation. So before we kind of dive into the agenda, just want to share a little bit about Maryland Workforce Alliance, reintroduce ourselves a bit, and just really, again, thank you all for being here. Our goal at MWA is to empower a diverse network of stakeholders to create, expand, and optimize high-quality work-based learning programs, including apprenticeships, really building that adaptable workforce that our economy needs right now in Maryland and beyond. And the ultimate hope is to strengthen our communities, both the individuals and the businesses. So we have the opportunity to bring together partners from trades and unions and associations, management organizations, and a number of other intermediaries. And we are excited that you all are joining us today. Excellent. So to kick us off today, we do have a guest from Governor Moore's office, Brad Fallon. He's a lifelong public servant and has served the state of Maryland in various capacities over the years, including with elected officials in the House of Delegates. And he also taught, Brad, I want to get this class under my belt, Public Sector Innovation at the University of Maryland. Timely, obviously, right now. So we're excited that you're joining us. Brad is the Deputy Legislative Officer in Governor Moore's office, and I will hand it over to you, Brad, to kind of kick us off from your perspective. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, and thank you all for the support on this initiative, both on the RAISE Act that I'm going to speak to in a minute, but really just kind of overall. I talk to Senator Rosapep frequently about apprenticeships, particularly with this initiative, because he's our wonderful Senate partner and he thinks really highly of this organization, of course, being involved in it. So that means a lot to me. I only have about 10 minutes, I know, because we're running between hearings around. So what I'll do is give kind of a general overview of the legislation. I won't go as deep into detail as I would with kind of non-workforce oriented folks, but just let me know if I can fill in any answers, and then I'll just kind of give a status where we are in the initiative. So the RAISE Act is an acronym, as we often do here in the governor's office. This is the Registered Apprenticeship Investment for a Stronger Economy Act. We are excited about this legislation. This is inspired by some of the recommendations of the Apprenticeship 2030 Commission that just had its final report voted out and published last week, which we're very excited about, and I think will be a continued source of inspiration on apprenticeships and workforce development moving forward. I think folks on here are all aware, but this really focuses in on that registered apprenticeship model and saying we have a high quality, a high standard of what these workforce development processes look like, that it really brings in that experiential learning and the classroom settings, and really showing folks what that means. You know, tomorrow we have a bill hearing, the first bill hearing on the RAISE Act in the Senate Finance Committee, which we're very excited about. At the panel, we're going to have the Lieutenant Governor, Aruna Miller, our Secretary of Labor, but also two apprentices. Both of them have just recently graduated, one from AT&T on an IT procurement on kind of the non-traditional end, and the other from Dynamic Auto on a more traditional side of the banner here. we're really excited to have them because they kind of personalize what this looks like. And one of the individuals from Dynamic Auto, a gentleman named Nate Fink, will actually speak to the table that this helped him actually get a good paying job, a good middle class job, while keeping options open. He was awarded about 50 to 60 college credits through his time at CCBC, completing his registered apprenticeship. And he has told me, look, this is my career plan for now, but I'm really grateful that I now have the option, if I want to pursue a 4-year degree or beyond, to jump into that without starting from zero. So we're really excited about that model. I say all of that at the top because with lots of conversations with folks, it's been really important for us to focus in specifically on the registered apprenticeship model and kind of everything, the processes that go into that, but also just the high standard that is applied to that model. That has been something that, when we hear folks kind of express some nervousness about scaling up the apprenticeship model, the concern is good faith, right? It's a concern about, okay, are these going to be quality and are there necessary checks moving through the process? And I think that we can stand by that all day, that this is a sophisticated process through the Maryland Apprenticeship and Training Commission, through Chris McClary shop at the Maryland Apprenticeship and Training Program, and the significant buy-in from the department. So with that, I'll just jump into each section of the bill. A point at the very beginning of the bill where everything will live is the establishment of a Maryland Office of Registered Apprenticeship Development, or MORAD, as we've been calling it. That will be nested under the existing Maryland Apprenticeship and Training Program. And we're going to be working with Senator Rosa Pev on some amendments to create a private and public oversight board to make sure that there is a connection between the private sector and the public sector in advising some of these ends. What this shop will be is largely the shop in charge squarely of expanding these models, right? About recruiting new employers, about working with intermediaries, about utilizing incentives, and really helping guide folks through the process. They're also going to be required to do long-term data tracking. Something that's been very important both to the administration, to the legislature, and to the unions have been making sure that we are putting the worker first and ensuring that we are making these investments to an end, right? That after a registered apprenticeship, they are continuing on their work, that they are able to switch up companies when they need to because they have that certificate of registered apprenticeship completion, and that these are good paying jobs and actually tracking salary. This is really going to be the unit that the governor and the Secretary of Labor looks at moving forward to say, where are we on this? Where are we underperforming? And how do we improve? Which we're quite excited about. We're also creating 2 new tools for them to mention that I kind of alluded to there. The first is the Registered Apprenticeship Qualified Intermediary Program, which will help provide grants or, if we need to, procurement contracts to bring on intermediaries, to recruit employers, to serve as sponsors where needed for registered apprenticeships, but really that kind of group apprenticeship model to make sure that we are expanding into non-traditional sectors, to make sure that if there is, say a cybersecurity firm that is struggling with their workforce needs, that we have an intermediary that kind of is there to hold their hand through the process, move them through those initial setups of developing a curriculum or joining into a group, and moving through the regulatory process. We're also creating the Maryland Apprenticeship Incentive Program, which is that direct kind of pay per apprentice model that provides some grants and reimbursements after the first 7 months of bringing on a new registered apprentice to ensure that some of those initial costs are cut out and that we de-risk this investment. We think that is particularly important for firms that have never utilized this model before and are really kind of taking a gamble on setting up even the classroom space, but the curriculum and just candidly the time and energy into this program. This is something that, just to be very candid, has been met with some skepticism from particularly some of our friends in the labor unions, but I think is a very important piece of this to make sure that we are de-risking as we are pushing this model. And that when MORAD and intermediaries are calling up employers and making their sell, that there really is something to put on the table to help continue to push that attention. We had looked at automatic licensure upon completion of a designated registered apprenticeship. I will say here that is very likely to come out this year. That's okay. We're looking to be bold on this. We are having these conversations. They're very important. There are various concerns from folks, particularly in the plumbing community, about what this looks like. It's very split, honestly. And I think what we are looking forward to now is that part likely coming out and then working with them over the interim on it. So just wanted to make sure everybody's aware of that. The other piece is the expansion to journey person to apprentice ratios that I know we are all very familiar with. This has been subject to a lot of politicking, and candidly, this is the piece that we are not willing to give on because we think it's so important, but has attracted a lot of attention, as you might imagine, from the unions. The way that this one works is a little nuanced because we're looking to thread a needle here. First, to ensure that we are keeping adequate standards, particularly for hazardous occupations, this bill actually establishes a 1-to-1 journey person to apprentice ratio minimum moving forward. This is largely looking at what may be happening at the federal level with some of those standards being loosened and ensuring that we are providing a bit of a carrot, particularly to some of our friends in the labor union community, that we hear their concerns in places, but we think there is an appropriate expansion in others. The second is that it allows for a ratio expansion off the get-go for those that are deemed to be by the department non-hazardous occupations. And what that pulls from is a piece of legislation that passed last year that required the Department of Labor to assemble that list, to find and go through a pretty tedious review on what occupations are ripe for an apprentice and have a non-hazardous piece. Candidly, I see this as a bit of a proof of concept. It is showing that you can expand out those ratios with proper oversight and still have the results that we're all looking for and striving for here. In that model, what it would look like is that right now, any apprenticeship sponsor can go to the Maryland Apprenticeship and Training Council and ask for an expanded ratio. They can then recommend to the Secretary of Labor, and the Secretary almost always follows that recommendation. Currently, before they go to MATSE, they have to wait a year, which we kind of call the probationary period for them setting up this new apprenticeship program. This simply says, if you're on this non-hazardous list, you can skip that 1 year and just come and request that expansion. Of course, that's something that we're very interested in when we're looking to scale up, when we have goals that are as bold as what is set forth in the founding legislation for the Apprenticeship 2030 Commission and the Blueprint for Maryland's Future. And we truly think it's vital to do this and allow those expansions to meet that goal. And then lastly is very technical. We are looking to sunset the Youth Apprenticeship Advisory Committee, not because it is inadequate, but because candidly, its initial purpose has been met. And now it's really being rolled into the CTE committee moving forward, just making sure that we're streamlining and reducing any duplication as we are having so much attention and resources put on this. So that really is the bill. I think the only other thing that I would say here is, in addition to the amendment that I brought up earlier, likely striking the section, the labor unions have really pushed for tracking on this. I consider that friendly, candidly. We were planning on doing that anyway. The benefit of working for a governor who is very data-driven is that we are always in the weeds. And so this was going to be his expectation. So we will likely see some more information come into the bill that we would accept to expand out just exactly how long we're tracking. They're asking for a period of 5 years and the data that we're tracking. And truly our hope is that that is helpful for everybody, for the state to understand the return on their investment and to continue this march towards expanding out registered apprenticeships, but also to organizations like this that are really focused on selling that model, but also focused on what this actually means long-term. And hopefully in 5 years, we have a good set of data. We should publish this annually, but we'll have a good look back period to be able to march on through 2030. So that has really been the bulk. We are very interested to see how the hearing goes today. I think that it'll be received fairly positively, and the Lieutenant Governor is excited to be leading the panel. But with that, with just a couple minutes left, I'll pause and see if there's any questions.
Any questions for Brad at this time? Brad, if you can hang out, or we'll make sure if we've got questions for you, if you can't hang out, we'll make sure we'll get back to you so we can share those with the group. That's great. Thank you. Thank you, Brad. And thank you, Governor Moore, for your leadership on this issue. I'm John Colborn. I'm Executive Director with Apprenticeships for America, and couldn't be happier to be joining with the Maryland Workforce Alliance today to talk about innovations in apprenticeship policy at the state level. It's something we have been tracking as a national organization. We think there's a lot of opportunity out there in the states. and incredibly pleased to be able to work on the ground with a group in Maryland to track some of the exciting developments that are going on with the RAISE Act and in other areas in Maryland. My job is really simple today, though. It's to introduce the brains of the outfit, Harry Leach, who's my colleague and who has done quite a bit of work on tracking state policy. And so with that, Harry, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks, John. I'm going to start by giving a bit of context about what's going on in apprenticeships nationally, and then look at what's happening in Maryland specifically, and then Len's going to talk a bit more about the bill that Brad just went over. So I'm sure everyone here is fairly familiar with apprenticeships as a concept, and why we're so keen on expanding them. It really is the gold standard in workforce development. We've got really robust data showing the high returns. I wanted to talk a bit about why it matters for Maryland right now, especially. So Maryland has had kind of fairly stagnant productivity growth for the last 6-7 years, and a really large part of this is about talent. You can do kind of comparative analysis. You can split out the impact on productivity growth of talent pipelines, and it's quite significant. And we've got a kind of fairly unique situation of quite high education levels, especially kind of degree levels, pretty low unemployment, but also quite a few different indicators showing a mismatch between that talent pipeline and what employers are looking for, the skills that businesses need. So most evidenced by far more job openings than job seekers. So we think that apprenticeships is an approach that really bridges that gap and makes sure that you're training the workforce that you need in those jobs. Just looking at what's going on in apprenticeships, the national picture on the next slide. So there's about 700,000 active registered apprentices in the US at the moment. The good news, looking at that graph on the left, is there's been quite a lot of progress recently. So the amount of apprentices in the US has doubled over the last decade. We've seen an increase in political attention. So since the second Obama administration, there's been a lot of focus on apprenticeships. We've seen federal funding scale by over 10 times, from 30 million to around 300 million over a decade, although 300 million is still comparatively low. And we've seen a lot of activity at the state level. There's been over 1,000 pieces of state legislation similar to this in the last decade. Lots of support and attention from governors and executives as well. The bad news is in that table on the right. So the US is very firmly at the bottom of the league table when it comes to apprenticeships when you compare internationally. So the measure we use here is looking at apprentices as a proportion of the labor force to make it comparable. When you take out military apprentices, the US is at 0.3%. The kind of traditional powerhouses of apprenticeships, Germany, Switzerland, at around 3%, and other countries are sort of between 2 and 3%. I guess the silver lining here is, if you look at what's happened in those countries, they provide a good blueprint for how you can scale and grow apprenticeships really quickly. So England went from 50,000 apprentices to 500,000 over a period of about 15 years. France has doubled its level of apprentices in the last 4 or 5 years. So those countries give us a good blueprint and example to get up to those levels. And then looking at what's going on in Maryland. So as John said, we recently produced a kind of big analysis of what's happening, how are states growing their apprenticeship programs. Maryland, just on the next slide, is in a fairly good position comparably. So again, the main measure we use is looking at those active apprentices as a proportion of the labor force, where Maryland ranks 12th when you look at other states. Another kind of key bit of context that we look at is that proportion of apprentices that are in construction. So construction is the one area in the US where apprenticeships are really developed and scaled. Historically, it's been almost 100% construction. Over the last decade, we've seen diversification into new industries. Brad mentioned procurement in IT. We've seen a lot of progress there in Maryland since 2014. So it's gone from 96% to 70% of apprentices in construction. Still, nationally across the country, we're at around 2/3 of apprentices in construction, but the trend is showing expansion towards new industries. And then on the policy side, so our report, goes through what various states are doing to grow and expand apprentices. There's a good story here in Maryland. So it's had a state apprenticeship agency for quite a long time. If you look at the states that register apprentices at the state level rather than federally, they tend to have the ability to be a bit more dynamic and change things, improve processes, be a bit more agile. There's a lot of evidence of kind of political, legislative, and executive support for apprentices. Quite a high level of legislation. And Governor Moore has referenced apprenticeships not only in this year's State of the State address, but also last year. One of the features we pulled out as a good positive measure to grow apprenticeships is setting a target for growth. So there's a handful of states that have a ambitious target for growing apprenticeships. We think this is a really important kind of low-cost way to focus attention on growing and diversifying apprenticeships at the state level. So the Maryland Blueprint for Education set a really, really ambitious, but we think achievable if you look at what other countries are doing, target to really expand apprenticeships significantly. And finally, there are various different bits of state funding that are available. So there's a tax credit, which is quite a common approach to incentivize employers to start apprentices. There's also various grant funding available. I think Brad mentioned, and Len might talk about a bit more, the incentive program in the RAISE Act. That's the bit that we're really excited about here, because that is more comparable to how lots of those countries have scaled apprenticeships rapidly, have funded it, both in a kind of incentivizing terms for employers, but also funding the work that intermediaries do. So yeah, lots of sort of positive things in the last few years in Maryland, but we're really excited about the progress that this bill makes. So with that, I might pause there and hand over to Len to talk a little bit more about the provisions in the bill.
Are you?
Is there, I'm sorry, is there this is Alan Dockwitz from SOFL. Just a quick question. Will there be any a focus on trying to get these incentives for the high schools, trying to meet those 2030 standards? There's always a question now about how employers can access them, and this has been a question I've been hearing. So thank you.
This is Jim Rosenfeld. I'd be happy to jump in on that question. Okay, I can't hear you.
We can't hear you, Adrian.
Jim, why don't you go ahead and give a quick answer, and then we can turn this over to Len. Does that sound all right?
Yeah, that's fine. So if I understand the question correctly, do all these efforts apply to registered apprenticeships starting in high school? And the answer is absolutely yes.
Great. And because I see, the reason I asked is because I've noticed, there's that $1,000 tax credit for 450 hours, I believe. That's the case?
That's a different thing. There's an existing tax credit.
Right. Okay. And this would be this will be different.
Totally different. This is not a tax credit. This is going to be pay per apprentice and grants and contracts. It's not.
Great. And it will go to the high schools too. Great.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Thanks.
And I know Len has a hard stop, so I wanted you to offer any additional points you wanted to, Len, before you have to hop off.
Sure. I mean, just the main thing is that the Senate hearing is today, but the House hearing is on the 27th. And if you'd like to testify, we encourage you to testify for the RAISE Act in the House as well. The deadline to do that online is the 25th. So I just want to give you those 2 dates for the House side. It's the Senate where the deadline is already passed to sign up to testify, but you could always follow up with written information that you would email to the members of the committee, and they'll still be glad to receive that. But I just want to emphasize about the dates for next week, the 25th to sign up and the 27th for the hearing in the House Economic Matters Committee. And with that, I have to jump. I apologize, but this is terrific. And
it's a hot season for you, Len. So
yeah, my gosh, yes. All right, thanks.
Thanks for all you're doing. Appreciate it.
Sure thing.
This will give us a good opportunity to hop. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, John.
I was just going to say, Harry, anything you want to hit on this slide before we press on to Jim here?
Just to add a few points. So Brad went through the provisions before, but let me just add a few points about, where we see best practice, where we see other states or internationally doing similar things. So the biggest one, the most important one for us, is this Maryland Apprenticeship Incentive Program, which is essentially going to introduce a pay for apprentice or expand and formalize a pay for apprenticeship model, where you get a sort of guaranteed and sustainable reimbursement per apprentice. So this is actually quite an uncommon approach in the US. Most workforce development programs are funded by competitive grants, which are often short term. You don't have much certainty about them. There's a handful of states that are moving towards this model. So California is the largest one. They fund their apprenticeships in this way. So they have a fund called the Apprentice Innovation Fund. They've seen quite a lot of growth. So since that was introduced, there's been about 20% growth year on year in non-traditional apprenticeships, so apprenticeships outside of construction. This is far more similar to how apprenticeships are funded in every other country that's got a developed system. So we see this as absolutely key, providing sustainable investment. That means that the programs have got the right incentives to grow. It's far more targeted towards outcomes. If you have an apprentice, they're in a job, you're getting the right outcomes rather than some of the grants that can be a little bit more removed from the process. The other one that I would just quickly talk about is the journey person to apprentice ratios. So as Brad said, it sounds like there's been a lot of debate on this. Internationally, this isn't really a feature of apprenticeship programs, and it's kind of a quirk of the US coming from a construction background and the policy approach coming from a construction background. But it does create a barrier for an apprenticeship program in IT where you could supervise 10 apprentices with the same with one mentor. So we think, again, this will be a provision that will really help to kind of unlock growth and progress. And yeah, I think that was all I was going to say on this.
Thanks, Harry. Appreciate that. Super helpful deep dive. And again, like national perspective, what can we learn that works in other states that we haven't done in Maryland, or what do we have to teach the rest of the country and kind of test out some innovative things here. So appreciate both of those exchanges and opportunities to kind of dive in there. We've got lined up next another expert, another lifelong public servant here in Maryland. Jim Rosapep, thanks for hopping on here and all of your advocacy on behalf of unions and trade organizations and apprenticeships over your long career. Would love to hear your top lines and any other previews you want to share with the group.
Sure, and I'll be brief and happy to answer questions. The context of this is a multi-year effort by folks in the Department of Labor, folks in the legislature, folks in the State Department of Education, to scale up registered apprenticeships starting in high school, not just starting in high school, but including starting in high school. And the state labor department has gotten a series of federal grants, which they have used in part to do their own pay per apprentice. So it's a model that's been working in Maryland, as well as other places. What's significant about the raise bill is that the governor has taken on the mantle and made it one of his top legislative priorities. Governors only make a certain number of things each year a legislative priority. Him making apprenticeship one is a big deal for the movement, both in terms of specifics, but also in terms of the symbolism. So it's an important breakthrough. As Brad mentioned, much of the bill is based on the expected recommendations of the Apprenticeship 2030 Commission, which we set up last year to come up with a plan and tools for how we get from the 12,500 or so apprentices we have today to 60,000 apprentices, which would be about 2.3% of the workforce, which would be an average of what the other nations that have large-scale apprenticeships have. And a lot of the recommendations that will be published actually on Monday, it's coming Monday, are in the governor's bill. But there's also a lot in the recommendations that are not in the governor's bill. And I'll just touch on a couple of them. One is a great emphasis on public service apprenticeships. There's 20% of working people in Maryland work for the federal, state, or local government. So huge opportunity in the public sector. And in state employment, obviously, the state has influence. And so the governor has also been very supportive of moving forward on public service apprenticeships. We also have recommendations in the report dealing with apprenticeships in regulated industries. So, for example, the insurance commissioner, our hospital regulatory commission, our public service commission have all agreed to work with their industries over the next year to identify apprenticeship opportunities in those regulated industries. So there are a lot of other pieces of this you'll be hearing more about when the commission report comes out, but they're totally synergistic with what the governor's bill does. The other thing I'd say is in the governor's bill, he takes some of the $25 million that we set aside a couple of years ago for implementation of the recommendations of the 2030 Commission and begins to spend the money. He also has language in there requiring an ongoing appropriation for the pay per apprentice for, I think it's 5 years. There also is in the Apprenticeship 2030 Commission report a discussion on the need for permanent funding for pay per apprentice, and that's the next hill to climb. We're getting this launched, we're getting it scaled, we're moving forward, but the work is far from done. Happy to answer questions.
And Jim, you did say report to be issued next week. And we would certainly expect to offer a briefing on that for anyone who's interested. So we'll be following up with Adrian to get that out there. And I also think there's interest from a national audience in some of these recommendations. So we'll look forward to connecting to that as well.
Great.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Jim. Any other questions for Jim while we've got him?
I'll hang in.
Appreciate it, Jim. Awesome. Yeah, super helpful context. And again, like the longitudinal study of this work is critical. So just, yeah, appreciate that, Jim. We'll look for questions in the chat or folks to hop in. With that, I'm going to shift over to another speaker. Before I do that, actually note that I put a few dates in there in terms of testimony regarding the RAISE Act, put some key dates, guidelines for the written testimony. But for those who can't make the 219 or missed yesterday's holiday deadline, 227 is still available. You have to register by the 25th if you want to provide oral testimony. Written testimony, they can take another time. So just appreciate those opportunities for folks to get involved in a deeper way. And so next, and speaking of involvement and thinking about how to actually apply some of this to the workforce challenges in front of us, Tasha Cornish is joining us. She's the executive director from the Cybersecurity Association. She'll give you a little overview of what they do as a statewide nonprofit and really a matchmaker between employers, job seekers, education institutions, and all of us who recognize that cybersecurity is a critical part of everything we do now. So Thank you, Tasha, from your industry perspective and sharing with us today.
Great. Thanks, Adrian. I'll just take a couple of minutes. I am really encouraged by the number of times I've heard cybersecurity and IT mentioned, so I won't belabor those points too much. We know collectively this is a great industry for growth. I think there's a lot of potential, and I think that the RAISE Act specifically does address some of the main barriers to creating apprenticeship as a true workforce pipeline in an industry that has really depended on a more traditional internship model or job shadowing or some of the other, we'll say lighter touch job pathways in the past. So just a quick overview of the Cybersecurity Association. So we do have approximately 600 corporate members. Many of those are in Maryland or the region, and many of them are these smaller companies. And when we're talking about de-risking the apprenticeship process, it's critically important for these small companies to have things like this in place to build their pipeline. They're often at a disadvantage when it comes to recruiting these high talented individuals because they don't have the brand recognition, they don't have a variety of factors that a lot of larger government contractors and even commercial IT providers have. So being able to build that is key. I think also, just speaking a little bit on the government contracting side, I'm really excited to hear that one of the folks on the panel is an AT&T apprentice. They really are, that model's been a gold standard here in the state of having a community college intermediary or sponsor work with a group like AT&T that does have federal contracts to really build up their help desk and IT pipeline. So really excited to hear more about that and that they are speaking, because we can tell you that those margins are very small. So when we're thinking about what a standard Maryland cyber company looks like, a lot of them are depending on government contracts. A lot of them do struggle with some of this capital to employ apprenticeships. So I won't belabor it too much. I think there's several factors of the RAISE Act that will help, including, of course, the office dedicated to this to make sure that they are, employees and employers and everyone can find the right opportunities for them. The fee, the apprenticeship payment for each apprenticeship is huge, or each apprentice is huge, especially when we're talking about de-risking. And we love the ratio, making it easier for IT companies and others to get registered. So there's a lot of really practical things in this act. We're really excited to support it and, maybe serve as an intermediary in the future, because I think that's the other part of it that we find really exciting, is to make it easier for intermediaries to get engaged, because that really is the key to scaling, as we've heard. So thank you for this time.
Thanks, Tasha. Really appreciate it. And I think, one of the reasons I think it's important for you to share your voice in the conversation is because I agree, apprenticeships have not been seen in a cybersecurity setting as much as they should be. And as much as we have good talent waiting to be placed at the right employers, just really helpful to elevate that conversation. So appreciate you taking the time today. Any folks have any questions for all of the experts we have in the group? Or Jim, was there anything else you wanted to add before you have to run?
Well, the only thing I was going to suggest, we have a small enough group here. Could the folks who've not spoken identify themselves?
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit who they are and who they represent.
I can go. Jen DeWeese with the Maryland Apprenticeship Connector, as well as the Maryland Center for Construction Education Innovation. I had registered for the summit, but ended up having some health issues. So I'm sorry I didn't get to meet all of you in person, but I'm really excited for this. MAC 100% supports the RAISE Act as well as MCCI. So definitely going. I cannot make the tomorrow session, but I am going to sign up for the one later on.
Awesome. Great, Jen. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. I'm Matt Jordan. I'm the Maryland Executive Director for Build Within. I have the pleasure of working with the Service Year program. Thanks to Governor Moore and his leadership there, we're very excited about the RAISE Act and moving and advancing the apprenticeship model. To all people in Maryland, not just to young people. We think it's a great model. Tasha just made a bunch of lovely points that I'd like to reiterate. But I will be in attendance tomorrow in the Senate Finance Committee. Very excited. Just want to be here as a resource. We are a recipient of the ABA grant. And so we have, at no cost, the means to be able to help employers across the state, help job seekers get the training they need. We really just want to grow the model. And we think that apprenticeships is the best way to bridge the gap. So very excited about all the conversations happening because of the RAISE Act. And thank you all for your time today, including me.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt.
I did forget to mention that Mac was a Maryland Works grant recipient. We also are a Wanto grant recipient as well. And that's for women.
Yeah. This is the group that leads the way on braided funding, it seems, putting together all the things you can to make it happen. So again, like the RAISE Act addresses a lot of those things that we find in different places. So appreciate that. And Matt, please share gratitude with Paul and Lisa and all the work you all are doing in your office, lean and mean over there as well.
Hi, I'm Jen G from IBM. I wanted to introduce myself as well. Tasha, to your comment, we have many cybersecurity apprentices, so I'm happy to talk more there. That is definitely an area, especially sitting in the DMV area, where we're seeing an increase of. So yes, please, we can exchange info. IBM has been in the apprenticeship space, registered with the DOL since 2017. So I think that's like 7-8 years now. We've exceeded 1,000 apprentices to date with 35 occupations. Very proud of the journey that's gotten us here. But specifically why I'm here on this Maryland call is, one, selfishly, I'm in the DMV area, but two, I do think, to your point, Adrian, the braided funding, the opportunities, well, like for us as a global, but of course a national company, right, nationwide, we have to prioritize where we invest. And things like this, the RAISE bill, will help draw attention and priority more to Maryland. And so I'm looking forward to exploring more what this means.
Yeah. And you bring up a really, really good point in terms of we bring a lot of folks here for education. How do we keep them here as well? I think that's a really, really good point. Thanks for sharing. Thanks for joining.
Hi, I'm Alan Dodd, because I did ask a question earlier, but just give you a little background. I work for Software Partners along with my colleague Katie, who was on as well. And actually I had another colleague, Nicole, who was on earlier. She had to drop off, but they actually both work on the cybersecurity RA expansion. We also do so we do national work on that. We also have a Center of Excellence grant with the Department of Labor, where our goal is to align workforce, education, and apprenticeship systems. So we've been doing a lot of work in Maryland. Might have seen me at some of the conferences, raising the bar. So really loving to hear from all of you. It's been great hearing about this bill. I think it's very positive. So yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah. Thanks for joining, Alan.
Oh, and I forgot to mention, I've been doing a lot of work with Brandon Butler from the Maryland Workforce Association to do a lot of that work too. So slipped my mind, been a busy week too,
Hello, everyone. Sorry, my camera can't come on because it was kind of short notice when I got the email. But nevertheless, my name is Marnie Alexander. I am the founder and CEO of the Episode Foundation. And we are based out of New Jersey and the state of Pennsylvania. Our primary focus is cybersecurity. I'm familiar with SAFO partners. But also the reason why I wanted to join this call, just as Jen, is from an educational perspective. But more so recently, I was just in Germany and I was speaking with someone where this gentleman is now in the US, and he said that he is working in a capacity as an engineer. And it was through an apprenticeship while he was living in Germany. But he said that one of the interesting factors that he find with, in terms of why apprenticeship is not so vastly recognized in the US is because in Germany, a lot of companies see it as a win-win for everyone. So despite if the individual, gets an apprenticeship at one corporation, if they leave and go to another one, they will still benefit. And so I'm always looking for innovative ways to be able to speak to employers so that they can understand the benefit behind it. Because we take more of a pedagogical perspective with our cybersecurity. So thank you so much. And what I've heard has been very thought-provoking.
Thanks for joining us, Marnie. Appreciate it. And again, appreciate your perspective you're bringing to the conversation. Yeah, and just for all of you for joining today, I think I did not expect a full cyber perspective, but I'm glad that they organically landed here. I think it's really important, and I just think it elevates the need for this continued conversation. Before we wrap this early, just want to offer anybody else another question or another thought before we give folks a few minutes back from the day for their day. Awesome. Excellent. Going to put a couple of more links in the chat, and then we'll definitely follow up with folks for email, with email after this. And just expect, as John mentioned, as Jim mentioned, we've been following and working very closely with the Apprenticeship 2030 Commission folks, and their final report will be coming out. So look for another briefing and opportunity for a cross-sector conversation about what that means. And then for folks who are interested in following the bill, the RAISE Act, we put the link in there earlier. And if anybody wants to join in testimony, there's some instructions there again. John, any parting words from you, from AFA's perspective?
Thanks so much for having us. Great to be partnering with you on this. Look forward to seeing folks at the hearings and working with you going forward.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thanks everyone for your time today. We'll be staying in conversation, look for a few more opportunities to connect, and I hope you all have a good rest of the week. Take care, everybody. Thank you.